What's up guys? Before we get into today's review, I wanted to quickly tell you all that I've launched a new YouTube channel. It's called WTP Productions and it's all about Pokemon. Pokemon is probably the one thing I love more than animated shows from the late 90s and 2000s, so I'm pretty excited to start turning that passion into awesome videos. There's going to be reviews of the Pokemon games in the same style as my reviews on this channel, in-depth videos about Pokemon history, mysteries and unsolved questions, and even a podcast dedicated to reviewing every episode of the Pokemon anime. If any of this sounds interesting to you, I'd love if you checked out the channel and subscribed if you like what you see. I've taken up enough of your time though, so let's get stuck into what you're really here for. My name's Brandon and this is Cartoon Network Video Game History, a show where I take a look back on all of the video games based on Cartoon Network shows and retrospectively review them. This week we're reviewing yet another Ben 10 game, but this time with a little bit of a twist. While the first three games have been very similar, despite being developed by 3 different studios, Ben 10 Alien Force: The Rise of Skywalker, The Rise of Hex, is radically different in a number of ways. The Rise of Hex was released on May 26, 2010 for the Xbox 360 and on May 31 for the Nintendo Wii. This is where the differences begin. You'll notice that Sony consoles have been excluded entirely, while the Nintendo DS has also been ignored. And for the first time ever, a Cartoon Network game was released exclusively as a downloadable title. The only way to get your hands on this game was to purchase it through the Xbox Live Arcade or as a WiiWare title on the Wii. It's extremely weird that the PlayStation 3 was snubbed by this game, considering it also had a digital store at this point in time. Another insane difference is that you can no longer access this game. Didn't purchase the Rise of Hex back in the day? Well, you can never legally play this game. Even with backwards compatibility being a huge part of the Xbox ecosystem, as far as I can tell, there's no way to purchase it. This is a warning to everyone buying into the Stadia and xCloud all digital and streaming future. This kind of thing will be far more prevalent if we go down that path. As is tradition at this point, the Rise of Hex has a brand new developer. Black Lantern Studios are at the helm here. They started in 2005, and much like many developers at the time, they had an extensive pedigree in licensed games. However, this would turn out to be the one and only game they would develop for Cartoon Network. Even stranger is that the publisher for the Rise of Hex is Konami, rather than D3. Critically, the game was a flop. On Metacritic, the game received a 52 for the Wii version and a 46 for the Xbox version. Reception from reviewers appears to be very up and down. IGN gave the game a 4.5 and Eurogamer gave it a 5. But Nintendo Life and official Nintendo Magazine UK gave the game a pair of 7s. With so many unique aspects to this game's background, I'm quite intrigued. Rise of Hex seems to have absolutely no ties to the past 3 games we've played in the series, so I've got no idea what I'm getting myself into. I really wasn't joking when I said this game was a huge departure from the past 3 Ben 10 games. Remember how those games were 3D beat-em-ups? In fact, do you know how basically every Ben 10 game ever released is a 3D beat-em-up? Well, this throws that concept out the window entirely. Ben 10 Alien Force: The Rise of Hex is a 2D side-scrolling puzzle platformer. Perhaps it's similar to the Nintendo DS titles that First Playable Productions have been making. I haven't played those, so I can't confirm. Before you get into the gameplay, you're greeted with some cutscenes. Calling them cutscenes is very generous though. These are some of the lowest effort slideshow-ass cutscenes I have ever seen. I know this was clearly a budget Ben 10 title, but a little bit of effort should have gone into this aspect, especially because you get less than a handful of them throughout the entire 3 hours it takes to beat the game. On top of the cutscenes just being poor from a visual presentation aspect, the writing is also pretty poor too. While Vilgax's attacks was far from perfect, the writing was quite fun and having Charlotte Fullerton in control was great. Going from that to this is so jarring. The story is completely nonsensical and the characters almost seem like parodies of themselves. When you start the game you have access to just 2 aliens, but you regain them pretty quickly as roughly 2 hours in you have all 10 again. Combat has clearly become a complete afterthought for Black Lantern Studios, with all of the focus placed on puzzle solving and platforming. Ben 10 games are mostly notable for their many different combos and unique attacks for each alien. In this game, each alien has a paltry 2 attacks, giving you no variety whatsoever in the combat. This actually doesn't matter too much though, because you don't encounter that many enemies, and the enemies you do encounter can be completely skipped without any consequences. In fact, by using Big Chill and Spider Monkey's special abilities that freeze enemies in place, you can run past almost every enemy without taking any damage. The Omnitrix meter has returned in the Rise of Hex, meaning each time you use an attack or special ability, it will be depleted until you eventually turn back into Ben. This is extremely annoying, but not in combat. I'll touch on this more later. I think my biggest gripe with the aliens is that they all seem to move almost identically. They all run and attack at roughly the same speed, and even the height of their jumps are pretty similar outside of some notable exceptions like Big Chill and Jet Ray. You play as 10 different aliens, but because of the way they feel, the game often gives off the vibe that you only have access to 4 or 5. Despite the developers clearly wanting to take the focus off of combat and give Ben 10 their own fresh take, they still included typical boss battles that are focused entirely on combat. This is so weird compared to the tone of the rest of the game, and needless to say, it's executed extremely poorly. The combat is not even remotely fleshed out, so why then dedicate these sections entirely to combat? Every boss battle here is so bloody unsatisfying. All three of them follow the exact same boring pattern, and I took literally no joy out of them. I'm not sure how exactly they could have done it, but some sort of puzzle related boss battles would have fit the tone of this game far better. As is tradition, each alien has its own unique traversal ability. While previous games have been all about the combat, with traversal being the icing on top, the entire Rise of Hex cake is made from traversal abilities here. The vast majority of gameplay is about using each alien's unique attributes to solve puzzles. You'll be moving boulders with Humongosaurus, climbing into small gaps with Goop, hovering over long pits with Big Chill, and standing on pressure plates with Echo Echo. If you're not a fan of puzzle solving, stay away from this game. In fact, even if you are a fan of puzzle solving, I'd still recommend staying away from this game. The puzzles here are just unequivocally no good. My biggest issue is that Black Lantern Studios seem to create one type of puzzle for each alien to solve, and then call it a day. Every puzzle is just the same thing repeated, and it becomes old very quickly. The only time I started to really enjoy the puzzles was towards the end, where they started stringing all of the aliens' abilities together. This felt much more enjoyable, it was fresh, and far from the repetitive nature of the rest of the game. Another huge gripe I have with the Rise of Hex is how bland it is. The whole game just feels sterile. Sure, the game isn't some barely functioning abomination, but it feels like there is no soul and no passion in anything here. It's a hard thing to describe without playing it, so I'm going to need all of you to just trust me on this one. The previous Ben 10 games, despite having many flaws, all felt like love letters to the franchise. This, on the other hand, feels like nothing. It's like kissing your sister. And then, on top of everything else, you have the fact that pretty much every single level in this game looks identical. They're all the same style of torch-lit underground cavern. From the first minute to the last, it seriously feels like you've been playing through one long level. Previous Ben 10 games have featured so many unique and vastly different environments, so playing this in comparison really sucks. Again, I get this was clearly a budget Ben 10 game, but was a tiny bit of variety too much to ask for? Oh, and I should mention that this game ends without any sort of credit sequence. You save the day and then almost immediately get kicked back to the main menu. A very anticlimactic, but also extremely fitting way to close out this game.
One of Ben's longtime enemies has captured Kevin and Gwen, and now Ben must use his 10 alien forms to save them. Ben 10 Alien Force, the Rise of Hex. Help Ben Tennyson rescue his allies and battle his way through the armies of the dreaded Hex. Ben 10, for the first time on WiiWare. Master the Omnitrix and unleash your alien force. Ben 10 Alien Force, the Rise of Hex.
Look, I've been almost exclusively negative about the Rise of Hex, but it's not completely irredeemable. There are nuggets of positivity to be found here, and considering some of the absolute train wrecks I played early on in the series, I probably should be grateful that it even works as intended. I think the biggest positive I have for this game is that Black Lantern Studios really should be commended for taking a risk here. Combat is without a doubt a huge part of Ben 10, but the fact that each alien has extremely unique abilities shouldn't be ignored. Taking those abilities and essentially crafting a puzzle platformer around them is a neat idea and concept. Having to combine all those powers to get through levels is a smart way to make players recreate the feeling of what Ben does in the show. Unfortunately, the end result here was executed almost as poorly as possible, and that's a massive shame, because as far as I can tell, every other Ben 10 game, outside of Galactic Racing obviously, follows almost the exact same formula as the first three releases. In the end, I'd have a hard time recommending this to anyone. I obviously wouldn't recommend this to someone looking to play a good game, but I also wouldn't even recommend it to a hardcore Ben 10 fan. The spirit of the show is treated with such malaise through the low effort cutscenes, uninteresting and repetitive environments, and aliens that control too similarly. When you add in the fact that you basically need to pirate the game and have a strong enough PC to play it in 2019, well, there's absolutely no way putting in all of that effort to play Ben 10 Alien Force: The Rise of Hex is worth it.